26th December, 1944, south of Bastogne, 37th Tank Battalion, 4th Armored Division, 3rd United States Army under Lieutenant General George Smith Patton, junior average advance barely 1 mile per hour through drifting snow that at times rose to track height. Snow came sideways in sheets that cut visibility to 50 yards and packed into every vent and sight. M4 Sherman tanks of the 37th Tank Battalion moved nose to tail on a single-lane road glazed with ice engines throttled low to prevent track slip. Cobra King, a jumbo assault tank mounting a 75mm gun and extra frontal plate, led the column toward Assenois Ridge. German outposts on the high ground watched through binoculars and reported nothing could climb that slope in such weather. At 1650 hours, Cobra King crushed the last barricade under direct fire from 88mm guns and reached the forward foxholes of the 101st Airborne Division. A corridor now existed where German maps had drawn only white emptiness. Inside, 5th Panzer Army headquarters officers stared at the sudden red arrow piercing their encirclement. Patton had driven armour 100 miles north and then straight through terrain calculated impassable for 10 days. Laughter that had greeted earlier warnings stopped cold. One major spoke 8 words. No one contradicted. They have tanks inside Bastogne in this blizzard. 16th December 1944. German armies opened the Ardennes offensive with 29 divisions committed across a 75-mile front. 5th Panzer Army and 6th Panzer Army received orders to reach the Meuse River within 4 days and then swing northwest to Antwerp. Success depended on speed and surprise before Allied reserves could react. Bastogne lay at the crossroads of 7 paved roads that radiated like spokes across the southern Ardennes. Control of the town meant control of lateral movement for 50 miles in every direction. German planners marked it essential for supply and maneuver, yet initially chose to mask rather than capture it at once. By 20th December, the 101st Airborne Division, reinforced by Combat Command B of 10th Armored Division and assorted artillery units, found itself completely surrounded. XLVII Panzer Corps tightened the ring with Panzerlehr Division to the west and 26th Volksgrenadier Division sealing the east. German commanders calculated the pocket would fall within days, while main forces continued toward the Meuse. 3rd, United States Army faced east toward the Saar when the attack began. Lieutenant General George Smith Patton, Jr. commanded 12 divisions stretched along a 150-mile front. At Verdun on 19th December, General Eisenhower asked how soon 3rd Army could strike north. Patton replied 3 divisions would attack on 22nd December, with 2 more corps following within 72 hours. Most officers present considered the promise impossible. Patton's staff had already issued warning orders before the conference ended. Entire divisions began disengaging from prepared positions and turning 90 degrees under continuous snow. Trucks loaded ammunition and fuel, while engineer companies ploughed roads that disappeared again under fresh drifts. For German command, the capture of Bastogne remained a secondary task that must not delay the drive west. Every day, the town held out disrupted lateral supply and forced detachments that weakened the spearheads. Panzer columns already reported shortages after 4 days of combat in cold that froze diesel in fuel lines. Allied Supreme Headquarters understood that loss of Bastogne would fracture the defense of the southern shoulder and open routes deep into Belgium. Holding the town bought time for reserves to reach the Meuse and for 3rd Army to complete its unprecedented wheel northward. Both sides recognized the race belonged to whichever army could impose its timetable first. German intelligence estimated 3rd Army required at least 7 days to disengage, refuel, and march north over iced roads. Reports of movement were dismissed as minor adjustments. 5th Panzer Army headquarters continued planning, as though Patton remained fixed facing the Siegfried Line. Inside the Bastogne perimeter, roughly 22,000 American troops, including the 101st Airborne Division elements of the 10th Armored Division, and attached units prepared for a siege they believed might last weeks. Outside, more than 50,000 German troops with over 100 tanks and assault guns prepared to reduce the town while the main offensive rolled on. Weather forecasts promised another week of snow and cloud that grounded aircraft and favored defenders who needed only to delay. The seventh day of the offensive passed with German columns still 20 miles from their first-day objectives. By 21st December, American resistance at road centers slowed progress to walking pace. Bastogne became the pivot upon which the entire German plan began to turn. Patton's promise at Verdun now stood as the single greatest threat to the offensive. If Third Army arrived before the ring crushed the defenders, the Germans faced battle on two fronts with lengthening supply lines in winter. The stakes at Bastogne were no longer local. The town held the balance between possible German victory and certain strategic failure. 5th Panzer Army assigned XLVIE Panzer Corps the task of containing Bastogne while the main armoured thrust drove west. Panzer Lehr Division and 26th Volksgrenadier Division received orders to tighten the ring and reduce the pocket at minimum cost in time and tanks. Staff officers calculated 2 days would suffice once the encirclement became complete. Snow began falling heavily on 18th December and continued without pause for 6 days. Temperature remained between -8 and -15 degrees Celsius. Roads away from main highways turned into single-track ice ribbons, barely wide enough for one vehicle. German commanders judged these conditions decisive. American medium tanks required firm going at 15 miles per hour or better to maneuver off roads. Deep snow and ice removed that possibility. Luftwaffe reconnaissance reported Allied airfields closed and supply columns stalled far to the south. Weather forecasts promised another 10 days of low cloud and snow. German intelligence concluded Allied tactical air power had been neutralized for the entire critical period of the offensive. Third Army redeployment estimates ranged from 7 to 12 days under the prevailing conditions. No previous Allied corps had ever shifted front 90 degrees in continuous blizzard. Senior German officers spoke openly of Patton being pinned by winter itself. Maps at 5th Panzer Army headquarters showed Bastogne as a shrinking red circle surrounded by white emptiness. On 22nd December, German commanders delivered formal surrender demand to the American garrison. Brigadier General Anthony Clement McAuliffe replied with one word that required no translation. The refusal confirmed German belief that the defenders could be ignored while panzer columns raced for the Meuse. Fuel and ammunition expenditure remained within planned margins because resistance consisted of isolated roadblocks rather than organized defense in depth. Panzer Lehr reported only minor delays masking Bastogne. Confidence grew that the town would fall without diverting significant force from the main effort. Weather became the silent Allied German planning never listed in orders. Every staff study repeated the same constraint. American armor cannot advance rapidly without air support and dry going. Snow deeper than 30 centimeters rendered cross-country movement impossible for tracked vehicles weighing 30 tons. All calculations rested on that single physical limit. German situation reports through 24th December continued to describe Third Army as fixed in the Saar sector. Occasional sightings of vehicle columns moving north received little attention. Officers dismissed them as local reinforcements that could not possibly reach Bastogne before the new year. The constraint was absolute. No armoured relief could arrive until weather or engineers created conditions American tanks required. Until then, Bastogne remained an isolated pocket scheduled for reduction at German convenience. Third Army staff officers worked by lantern light in freezing chateaux south of Luxembourg, tracing routes with chinograph pencils on maps that curled from damp. Every bridge received a tonnage, rating every crossroads, a traffic control post, every battalion a precise fuel allowance measured in gallons per mile at -10 degrees Celsius. Sleep came in 2-hour shifts between telephone calls that crackled with ice on the wires. Along the Ardennes highway, Sherman crews chipped ice from bogey wheels before dawn, breath freezing on scarf-wrapped faces. Turret rings refused to turn until heated, with blowtorches carried in half-track toolkits. Tracks slipped sideways on slopes no steeper than 1 in 10, forcing tanks to winch themselves forward with cables anchored to tree trunks. When a vehicle bellied in snow deeper than the hull, recovery crews worked bare-handed because gloves froze solid in minutes. Inside Bastogne, men of the 101st Airborne Division shared 1 K ration between 3 and melted snow in steel helmets set on flickering fires of ammunition boxes. Frostbite casualties arrived at aid stations every hour, feet black to the ankle after nights in flooded foxholes. Surgeons operated under headlights powered by jeep engines because generators failed in the cold. Belgian families huddled in cellars, while 155mm shells arrived at 12-minute intervals, shaking dust from beams older than their country. American medics carried wounded on doors torn from farmhouses because litter-bearers could not grip canvas straps with numbed fingers. Children cried quietly so the sound would not carry to German listening posts 200 yards away. German battalion commanders south of the town drank real coffee in heated command posts and studied situation maps that still showed clear fields of fire across open snow. Early reports of tank engine noise to the south reached regimental headquarters on 24 December and received polite skepticism. Distances were too great, roads too narrow, cold too intense for serious armoured movement. Officers marked the sightings as reconnaissance patrols and returned to planning the next morning assault. By Christmas night, Combat Command B remained 8 miles south of Bastogne, stalled before Clochimont, by minefields and 88mm guns dug into frozen earth. Crews brewed coffee on small gasoline stoves inside turrets and listened to wind howl through pine forests that hid German positions. Men spoke little. Everyone understood the calendar now measured relief in hours rather than days. German confidence reached its peak on 25 December. Weather held, visibility remained under 200 yards, temperature dropped another 5 degrees. Forward observers reported no significant movement on the southern roads after dark. Regimental diaries recorded the American effort as spent. 3 Corps assigned 4th Armoured Division as the spearhead with 26th and 80th Infantry Divisions protecting the lengthening flanks. The 4th Armoured began movement north from assembly areas around Longwy and Arlon on 22 December, with 2 combat commands in line. Combat Command B, under Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, received the direct axis toward Bastogne and the mission of opening a corridor at all costs. The division's 3 tank battalions together fielded roughly 150 medium tanks, which the combat commands task, organized with armored infantry and engineers. Supply columns followed at 4-mile intervals, carrying 5 units of fire and 3 days of rations calculated for continuous combat in sub-zero temperatures. Trucks delivered fuel at night because daylight brought Luftwaffe fighters despite the weather. From 22nd to 25th December, the division advanced village by village against deliberate defense. Martelange fell after house-to-house fighting that cost 11 Shermans to Panzerfaust teams firing from cellars. Warnoch required a night attack, supported by searchlights, bounced off low cloud. 37 prisoners came out when the last building burned. Chaumont Ridge held 88mm guns in concrete that took direct fire from 105mm howitzers mounted on tank chassis before infantry could close. Total distance covered in 4 days reached 33 miles over roads limited to one-way traffic. Average advance remained 4 miles per day, despite every crew working 18 hours without relief. 31 medium tanks became complete losses to mines and anti-tank guns by Christmas night. Replacement vehicles arrived from ordnance depots, still carrying cosmoline in the breech blocks. Weather began clearing late on 25 December. Temperature rose to -4 degrees Celsius, and cloud lifted enough for aircraft to fly. Around 240 C-47 aircraft dropped roughly 150 tons of supplies into Bastogne, while 500 P-47 fighter bombers struck German columns along every road leading east. 3rd Army Artillery moved forward behind the armour and registered targets by sound alone when visibility returned. Combat Command B reorganised during the night of 25 December. 37th Tank Battalion received 50 new rounds per gun and full fuel tanks delivered under blackout. Abrams issued simple orders for 26 December: reach Bastogne before dark, or do not stop at all. Christmas night passed in silence, broken only by sporadic mortar fire and the low rumble of diesel engines warming south of Clochimont. German regimental commanders reported the American advance spent after 4 days of costly gains, less than 2 miles each. Snow still lay knee-deep, off roads, temperature held at -7 degrees Celsius. 5th Panzer Army headquarters recorded with satisfaction that the relief column had failed to reach Bastogne by the promised date. At first light, 26th December 37th, Tank Battalion moved out behind a 15-minute artillery concentration that walked north through Remy-Champagne. Cobra King led Company C straight down the frozen road at 10 miles per hour, while armoured infantry cleared woods on both flanks. Resistance collapsed quickly. Panzerfaust teams fired once and withdrew under fire from coaxial machine guns that rarely missed at 50 yards. Clochemont fell by 1,000 hours. Assenois Ridge appeared 3 miles farther north, its crest marked by burning vehicles from the previous day. German artillery tried to interdict the single road, but shells landed long because forward observers lost sight in drifting snow kicked up by 30 tanks moving in column. At 1640 hours, Cobra King reached the last barricade outside Assenois village. 88mm guns fired from Hull down positions 400 yards away. Shells struck frontal plate and ricocheted harmlessly into the sky. The Jumbo kept moving. Tracks crushed timber and concrete dragon teeth while accompanying Shermans silenced the guns with high explosive. 1650 hours. Cobra King rolled into the lines of the 101st Airborne Division south of Bastogne. Handshakes replaced rifle bolts, supply trucks began crossing the corridor within 30 minutes. Physical contact restored what German encirclement had severed for 7 days. At 5th Panzer Army headquarters, the operations officer placed one red arrow directly through the circle that had ringed Bastogne since 20th December. For officers studying the map, the meaning was plain. Patton had done in days what German planners had assumed would take far longer. The myth that American armor required clear weather and dry roads died in that moment. Terrain and season had failed as barriers. Average advance on 26th December reached 8 miles in 8 hours through the same snow that supposedly made movement impossible. Bastogne changed from trapped garrison to German salient pierced at its heart. In the week that followed 26th December 3, Corps widened the Assenois corridor to 6 miles and linked solid defensive positions with the 101st Airborne Division. Supply convoys rolled north, day and night artillery and fresh infantry replaced the exhausted defenders. German counterattacks struck the corridor repeatedly until mid-January but never closed it again. 4th Armoured Division recorded 1,000 battle casualties and lost 84 medium tanks between 22nd December and 1st January. The Bastogne garrison suffered comparable losses from cold shelling and combat. German units opposite the town reported 2,500 casualties and 120 tanks destroyed or abandoned while trying to maintain the ring that no longer existed. The broader Ardennes offensive stalled completely by 3rd January 1945. 6th Panzer Army never reached the Meuse. 5th Panzer Army ran out of fuel 30 miles short of Dinant. The German armed forces expended their last strategic reserve of men and armour in 6 weeks of winter fighting and gained nothing permanent. Post-war studies by the United States Army Historical Division and former Wehrmacht officers repeatedly returned to the same turning point. 3rd Army executed a 90-degree wheel of 3 corps across 100 miles of iced roads and then drove an armoured division straight to Bastogne in continuous snow. Average march rate for the relieving formations reached over 20 miles per day, including combat and supply delivery, kept pace despite air attack and single-lane roads. German generals who once dismissed American dependence on weather and roads now studied the fuel tables that kept 4th Armoured Division moving. They noted that engineers ploughed or packed snow on hundreds of bridges in a few days, that truck companies delivered hundreds of tons of supplies each night, that Patton refused every proposal to wait for clear weather. The laughter stopped because Bastogne demonstrated a simple truth. No combination of terrain, season or surprise could paralyze a large mechanized army that possessed superior logistics and refused to recognize limits. Winter had not halted Patton. It had merely removed the Luftwaffe and given him the roads to himself. Bastogne became the place where German command learned that American armour moved fastest when conditions were worst.